My name is Donald. I've lived long enough to see the world change more than once. I saw the phone turn into a screen, a letter turn into silence. But nothing prepared me for the day when I discovered with my own eyes that while my daughter was fighting for her life in an ICU, her husband, I toasted on a yacht as if nothing was happening. Tell me something. What makes a man abandon his wife when she needs it most? If you are a father or mother or have ever taken care of someone with true love, you will understand what corrodes me inside to this day. You know that feeling that something is wrong, but you don't know exactly what. That voice in the back saying, "Go there, she needs you." That's that. I heard that voice, and I went. In this video, I'm going to tell you what I found out when I arrived in Los Angeles unannounced. I'm going to show you how the truth appeared in front of me without asking permission, and how, with a broken heart and hands calloused by life, I had to choose between keeping silent or to do justice. She didn't know I was coming, but maybe I also didn't know what I was about to discover. But before we dive into the heart of this story, I need you to know one thing. When I rang the doorbell of my daughter's house, I expected to hear running footsteps, childlike laughter, maybe even a "Dad, what a surprise," coming from the kitchen. But what I found was a locked door, a forgotten garden, and a mailbox overflowing with old bills. Late that afternoon, I found out that my daughter was alone in an oncology ICU, fighting advanced cancer, while the man who promised to take care of her toasted on a yacht with glasses of champagne in his hand. If at that moment I had known what was yet to come, perhaps my knees would have given way right there, on the sidewalk. But not giving in was what kept me going. If you've ever felt the world turn suddenly, if you've ever been caught off guard by life, then stay here with me. This story is not easy to tell, and before I move on, I wanted to ask for your support. If you can like this video and subscribe to the channel, it will help me take this memory to those who, like me, have already felt the pain of abandonment and the strength of silent love. Sometimes we just need to know that we are not alone. I landed at the Los Angeles airport with a light heart, but with my background from the flight. It was not a business trip nor a vacation. It was something simpler, a reunion. 3 years without seeing Melanie. 3 years of spaced messages, 2 short calls, excuses for time, routine, busy life. Still, I had hope. Hope to hear her voice saying, "Dad, I'm glad you came." That was what I carried in my luggage, a serene expectation made of nostalgia. The Uber driver, a very polite Latino guy, struck up a conversation when he saw the wooden box on my lap. He asked if it was a gift. I smiled and said yes, that I had made it myself in the workshop in Texas for my granddaughter to keep her grandmother's ring. He commented that his daughter loved old jewelry. It was a brief but good conversation, one of those that warms the chest for an instant. The car followed the highway while I looked at the city through the window. Los Angeles looked just like the last time. Golden sun, palm trees, an air of something too big to fit in one life. As the car rounded the corner of Melanie's street, my heart raced. I knew that house. She had helped pay the entrance, made the first garden with her years ago. It was a simple, beautiful house with white shutters and a garden in front that used to bloom like on postcards. But now there was something wrong. The garden was dry, the rose bushes she always sent photos dead. The children's toys were lying on the floor as if no one else was picking them up. A tricycle turned on its side. The mailbox seemed too full, with letters sticking out of the edges, some already crumpled by the rain. I got out of the car with a knot in my chest. I thanked the driver, grabbed my bag, the wooden box, and went to the front door. I rang the bell. Once, 2, 3, nothing. "Melanie, it's Daddy," I called, slamming the side of my hand on the door. No sound inside. I peeked out the window, but the curtains were closed. I tried to go around the side of the house, peeking between the slats of the gate. The backyard was just like the front yard, sad. The place seemed frozen in time, as if someone had left life behind. I went back to the front and stood there, looking at the mailbox. I picked up some letters, all addressed to Gary and Melanie, an overdue electricity bill, a supermarket brochure, and a letter from the hospital, Cedars Sinai. My heart stopped for a second. I read it again to be sure. It was from the hospital. My daughter's name stamped on the envelope. That's when I heard a voice coming from the side of the fence. "Are you looking for the McCoys?" asked a woman in a wide-brimmed hat, gardening gloves and scissors in her hand. "I'm Mrs. Thompson. I live next door." "Yes, I'm Melanie's father. I came by surprise, but it seems that there is no one." She lowered her hands, wiping the sweat from her forehead. "It's been a strange silence around here. I usually listen to the kids early in the morning, but I haven't heard anything for weeks. I thought they were traveling, maybe." She didn't tell me anything about travel. What a shame. Such a sweet family. I hope they're well. She returned to her garden, and I stood there, holding the hospital envelope in my hands. Now tell me, is there greater pain than realizing that you know nothing more about your own daughter's life? And this is where I wanted to open my heart to you who are watching. Sometimes we make a mistake thinking that we are close to the one we love, when in fact we are miles away within the same family. Have you ever been there? Have you ever felt that you no longer recognize someone you created, cared for, protected? If this feeling has already passed through your chest, comment below with just one word. "I understand," or "I've lived it," or just a "it's true," because when we share, the pain weighs a little less. I went back to sitting on the porch steps. The wooden box still holds firmly in my hands. I began to wonder if it wasn't silly to have come without warning. If it wasn't presumption on my part to want to fix what time has taken away. But something told me no. Something inside me insisted, "Stay, discovers, she needs you." It was at that moment, between doubt and silence, that I took my cell phone, with my hands already sweaty, and decided to call Melanie. The phone rang once, twice, and then someone answered. But it wasn't my daughter's voice. It was that of a man, with a serious tone, professional. "Mr. Donald Sims, this is Dr. Rivera. I'm a physician at Cedars Sinai Medical Center. Are you related to Melanie McCoy?" The ground seemed to disappear beneath my feet, and it was there, in that call, that the truth began to reveal itself. But that was not all. The worst, the most revolting, was yet to come. Because while my daughter was fighting for her life in a hospital bed, someone was living as if nothing had happened. Do you want to know where her husband was at that very moment? Get ready, because I found out. And I was never the same after that. That voice on the other end of the line, calm and professional, hit me like a punch. "She is in our oncology ICU. Her condition is considered critical." For a moment I didn't understand what he meant. I thought it was a mistake, perhaps a confusion of names. But when the doctor repeated it in more detail, cancer, advanced stage, weeks in the hospital, the world around me seemed to disappear. I felt my heart stop in my chest. I leaned on the railing of Melanie's balcony so I wouldn't fall. "What do you mean?" was all I could say. The last time I spoke to her 3 months ago, she just said she was tired. Very tired, but not a word about hospitals, about disease. Just the tone of her voice. Now it made sense. It was the tone of someone who was hiding the weight of the world. I hung up the phone and walked like an automaton down the sidewalk until I found a taxi. I don't even remember how I gave the address. All I know is that I walked in and said, "Cedars Sinai Medical Center, hurry, please." The driver, a grey-haired man with a thick accent, noticed my despair and only responded with an understanding nod. As the car made its way through heavy Los Angeles traffic, my head began to vomit memories I hadn't asked for. Melanie's graduation, the day she introduced me to Gary, salesman's smile, too sweet to be honest. And then that talk of temporary financial problems when Emma needed expensive dental work. He seemed so worried, so protective. He said he didn't want to burden Melanie with bills, and that if I had a reserve, I could help them for a few months. And me? I fell. I opened a joint account, transferred almost all of the emergency savings, and told them to use it wisely. Now, I ask myself, where was this wisdom? The city around me didn't seem to care what I was experiencing. People walking in a hurry, street vendors, horns, the sky still too blue for what I felt inside. I felt a heat rise in my chest. Blame. Guilt for not having asked more. Guilt for having respected too much the space my daughter asked for. Guilt for having hidden behind Martha's grief, my wife, life partner, and let Melanie fight alone. When the hospital appeared ahead, modern and shining in the sun, it looked more like a bank building than a place of suffering. I paid for the taxi with trembling hands. I crossed the entrance as if entering a court. The receptionist asked me for a document, signature, visitor's badge. Everything was a blur. As the elevator went up, I felt my heart pound in my ears. 7 floors, but it felt like I was climbing a mountain. Up there, the smell of antiseptic cut me like a razor. I was greeted by Dr. Rivera himself, a man of short stature, thin glasses, a direct and gentle look. "Mr. Sims, she has asked of you for the past few days. I thought it wouldn't come." That hurt, more than anything. I wanted to shout, but I didn't know. But I just shook my head. "Is she awake?" I asked. "Yes, but weak. The treatment has been aggressive. Do you want to see her now?" I nodded, and he guided me down a corridor of white lights and beeping machines. As we passed through other rooms, I saw scenes that broke my soul. A bald woman being fed by a nurse, an elderly man holding his wife's hand with tubes in each arm. When I stopped in front of door 712, my legs threatened to weaken. The doctor opened it, and there she was. My girl. Lying pale, thinning hair, sunken eyes, but still with the same way as when I was a child, when I was afraid of thunder and ran to my lap. She saw me and smiled. A faint but real smile. "Daddy." The word went out like a breath. I approached slowly, sat next to her, held her hand. It was cold, fragile, but alive. "I came as soon as I knew," I whispered. "Sorry I didn't come sooner." She closed her eyes for a moment, tears streaming down the corner. I didn't want to worry you. You had already lost Mommy. I thought I could handle it." "You don't have to endure it alone," I replied. "Never again." We stood there in silence, just listening to the beeps of the machines and the faint sound of her breathing. And it was in this silence that I realized what was wrong in her house was not abandonment by chance. It was abandonment by omission. And worse, Gary hadn't called me. He hadn't warned me. He was not in the hospital. And then, like a needle tearing through a curtain, anger began to appear. How does a father disappear while his wife is between life and death? How does he look at his children and pretend that everything is normal? And worse, why didn't he tell me anything? I felt deep in my chest that this absence was not carelessness, it was a choice. And when I picked up Melanie's cell phone there on the hospital table to look for emergency information, that's when it all started to make sense. The question that didn't leave me alone was, if she's here, where is he now? And the answer I found, you won't believe it. When I entered that room, it seemed that time stopped. The number 712 engraved on the door was also etched in my memory, as if it were an invisible scar. The light was dim, a silence broken only by the beeps of the monitors and the low sound of oxygen passing through the tubes. I saw my daughter there, and I swear that for a moment I thought it was someone else. Pale, too thin, her eyes sunken, her skin marked by needles, medicines, suffering. But when she turned her face and looked at me, it was her eyes. The same eyes of the little girl who jumped on her father's lap after school, who called me a hero with that crooked smile that only she had. "Dad," she said in a voice that barely left. And then he cried, and I cried together. I approached slowly, sat next to her and held her hand. Fragile, cold, but alive. "You came," she whispered, as if she couldn't believe it. "Of course I came. It should have come earlier. Forgive me for that." She tried to smile, but her face wouldn't let her. And at that moment I understood that there was more pain than the disease inside. There was something else eating away at my daughter. I asked her if she wanted me to pick up the kids, if she wanted me to call Gary. She turned her face, her eyes teary. "He's not here, Dad. He traveled for work. He said he couldn't postpone." I swallowed hard. "What about the children?" "The neighbor, Mrs. Ramirez, he kept them. He just left it there and went." I was silent. Each piece began to fit together. But the puzzle that was formed was one of abandonment, of neglect, of a man who chose to disappear when it mattered most. "Why didn't you call me, my daughter?" She stared at the ceiling for a moment, trying to hold back her tears. "After Mum left, you were so downcast. I thought telling you that would be cruel. I wanted to spare you. I thought I could handle it on my own. You should never be alone." She squeezed my hand with the little strength she had. But I was. That crossed me. A father hearing that. There is no major pain. I got up, went to the bedroom window. Los Angeles was still out there, alive, agitated, unaware of the pain that was going on in that bed. I went back and adjusted her blanket. "You won't be alone anymore, Melanie. That's over." She closed her eyes, tears flowing. "I can't stand lying to myself anymore, Dad." I knew that she was not only talking about the disease. There was something else, something she had been swallowing for a long time, and even weak, even with tubes in her arm and morphine running through her veins. She still tried to protect everyone but herself. "Gary, he has been distant for months. I thought it was the work, the pressure, the bills, but after I got sick, he changed for good. He said he didn't know how to deal with it. And then, it's gone." "Didn't he come back here?" "Only in the first few days. Then he started making excuses. A trip, a meeting, a crisis in the office, until stopped appearing. I wanted to ask him where he was now, but something inside me already knew that the answer would be like a blade. I stayed with her for a while longer, and when she fell asleep again, I took her cell phone there on the table. I unlocked it with her face, as I'd seen them do on TV, and it was there among the notifications that I saw it. An Instagram story, posted an hour ago, Gary's face, on a yacht, Marina del Rey, champagne, laughs, friends smiling in the background. He wore flowered shorts, and he looked happier than I'd ever seen him in his entire life, while my daughter was there, between life and death, while my grandchildren were left with a neighbor, while I was dying inside. I looked at the screen of that cell phone and everything in me screamed. But on the outside, I just took a deep breath. I deleted the screen, I put the device back in place, and I sat down next to my daughter's bed again. Her hand still slept inside mine. And there I promised, without saying a word, that it would not stay like this, because sometimes a father's silence is the beginning of a plan, and it was just beginning. Do you want to know what I did after I found out where he was? So hold on tight, because what came next was the first step of the turnaround. Still sitting there next to my daughter's bed, looking at that downcast face that once smiled so wide, I felt the anger growing like a tide. It wasn't the kind of anger that exploded. It was the kind that sinks us inside. Quiet, cold anger, which comes when we realize that we have been deceived calmly, with method, with calculation. Her cell phone was still there, loading slowly on the table. I knew I shouldn't move, but I also knew I needed to. Instinct spoke louder. I picked up the device again, careful not to wake her up, and went back to that story that was still in the air. Gary, my son-in-law, on a yacht in Marina del Rey at sunset, toasting with a group of friends. Everyone was smiling, as if life were an eternal Sabbath. And he, with that same fake smile he used when he asked me for help to solve a medical emergency a few months ago. I tapped on the location of the post. Everything was there. Place, time, people scheduled. I saw that he posted 2 more photos that same afternoon, one showing the bottle of champagne, the other filming his feet on the deck, with the caption, "Well deserved." Too deserved. while my daughter, his wife, was intubated in a cold bed, not knowing if she would see her children again. That made my blood run cold. I started printing everything, every image, every name tagged, every like. My engineer side started to act. I've always been good with systems, with maps, with tracks. And now, the broken system was my family. I opened the bank's apps. Melanie was always disconnected with money. Who took care of the accounts, according to her own words, was Gary. And that's why, when he asked me for that temporary help, I transferred the funds directly to an account in his name, but linked to the savings I kept in case of emergencies, the ones we pray never happen. Well, the emergency happened. But the money, apparently, turned into a boat trip. I entered the statement of that account. In the last few days, high withdrawals, payments at restaurants, a transaction for a boat rental company in Venice Beach. All linked to Gary's card. That wasn't just abandonment, it was theft. A cold robbery disguised as charm and smile. I got up from my chair, went to the bedroom bathroom, locked myself, and sat on the edge of the bathtub. I started to write everything down in a notebook that I always carry with me. Dates, values, prints, every detail. This was not going to turn into a scream or a fight. It was going to become a document. Proof. Justice. I was once the kind of man who trusted first and asked questions later. It was like this all my life. But there, sitting in that too-white bathroom, I became something else. A man who decided that no one would ever play with my daughter's pain again. And if you're listening to me this far, I appreciate it, really. I'm telling you this is not to expose anyone. It's to open your heart. Because maybe on the other side there is someone who has experienced something similar. And if you do, leave a like on this video. Subscribe here to the channel. It doesn't cost anything and helps me keep sharing those memories. I still have a lot of things in store to tell you. I went back to the room, sat down again. Melanie was still asleep. The beep of the devices was almost hypnotic. On his cell phone screen, Gary posted another story, a video. He diving into the sea, laughing. The caption was a joke with the word freedom. That was the last straw. Freedom. While my daughter lost hers. While my grandchildren were with a neighbor, not knowing if they would see their mother again. I looked at Melanie. I saw her mother's face in her. Martha always said, "Whoever makes light of the pain of the other loses the right to forgiveness." And I decided then and there that Gary was going to know this saying very closely, because what he called freedom, it was going to have a price. Do you think he knew I had arrived in LA? Do you think he imagined what I was about to do with everything I discovered? Neither is he. I didn't even know that this was just the beginning, because what I found out later, it would change everything. The next morning, I went down to the hospital cafeteria. I needed a hot coffee, but more than that, I needed a corner to breathe. I slept almost nothing that night. I stayed in the armchair next to Melanie's bed, listening to the noise of the respirator, the infusion pump, the nurse's footsteps in the hallway. Each sound was a reminder that she was hanging by a thread. When the sun began to enter through the cracks in the shutter, I left in silence and went downstairs. I ordered a black coffee without sugar. I've never liked too much sugar in things. I sat down by the window. Outside, the city went on as if nothing had happened. People coming and going, cars passing by, coffee vendors on the corner. And there I was, standing there, with my soul holes, trying to put together pieces of what was left of our history. I looked at the mug and saw the reflection of my face, older than I remembered, more tired too. And there, alone in that cold coffee shop, I began to remember. Remember everything. From Melanie as a little girl, with scraped knees, tangled hair, waiting for me at the school door. The night her mom, my Martha, he left too soon. I still see that day as if it were today. A silly accident on a wet road, and that's it. I was alone with a 7-year-old girl, and a pain that I didn't know where to put it. I worked day and night to give her everything I could. I refused promotion. I refused to move to another city. I wanted to be around. I made a sandwich to take in the lunchbox. I stayed at a parents' meeting. I appeared in school plays with a camera in my hand. Each of her diplomas was a medal on my chest. Helping her get into college was like finishing my own story with dignity. And then Gary came. Well-spoken, handsome, full of plan and ambition. And I, who have always been suspicious of those who smile too much without showing what they feel, were on the back foot. But Melanie was delighted. I had never seen her look at someone like that. And when she asked me to try, to give it a chance, I tried, struggled. I made a barbecue in the backyard for him, opened a good bottle of wine. I sat in the living room to listen to his stories about promising businesses and modern financial markets. I always thought that was too vague. But who am I to understand these new terms? I thought it was a generational thing. When the grandchildren came, Melanie's smile became even more beautiful. Emma and Jack were like new light entering the house, and I was there, always around, even from afar. When Gary called me one day saying they were in a temporary pinch, that the company's health insurance was in trouble, and that Melanie didn't want me to know, I believed it. I thought he was trying to protect her, as a good husband would, and I gave in. I said I had an old savings account, which I have never touched since Martha left. I opened a joint account in his name just to make it easier. He thanked him as if receiving an award. And today I see every withdrawal, every expense in that account like a stab. A walk in the mall, an expensive dinner, a daily yacht. While my daughter languishes in a bed, I didn't cry. Not yet. I don't know if it's because I've cried too much in my life, or if it's because there are pains that harden us inside. But I kept quiet, and in that silence, I began to plan. I wasn't going to scream or fight. This he expected. No, I was going to do it differently. I was going to use time, patience, detail. I was going to cut this man out of my daughter's life as one removes a tumor, with precision and silence. He wouldn't see it coming, and when he realized, he would have lost everything. Because one thing I've learned in this life is that justice comes without noise. It is the one that weighs the most. I left the coffee halfway and went back up to the room. Melanie was still asleep. The children, well, I still needed to see them. I needed to know how they were doing, what they knew, what they felt, and above all, how to protect them. Because when the truth comes, she doesn't choose time. And what I was about to find out about this man was going to change everything I thought about him. Do you want to know what I found when I went after the kids? So pay attention, because it was there that the house of cards began to crumble. I returned to the room with a different silence inside me. It was no longer the silence of those who don't know what to do. It was that of those who have already decided. Melanie slept peacefully, or as peacefully as possible for someone in that situation. Her face, even fragile, had something serene, as if somehow he knew I was there. I sat in the armchair, pulled the blanket and stood there, just listening. The sound of the devices, the coming and going of her breathing. I had already lost a woman to death. I wasn't going to miss another one to neglect. I spent the whole night awake, staring at the ceiling, reviewing every detail, every clue I ignored, every disguised gesture of Gary's. And there, in that uncomfortable hospital chair, I made a cold decision. In the morning, when the sun began to clear the room, Melanie was still asleep. I got up slowly, went out in the hallway and walked to a quieter corner. I took my cell phone and called the bank. It was time to nip the evil in the bud. The attendant recognized me by name. "Good morning, Mr. Sims. What can I help with?" I took a deep breath. "I want to close the backup account I opened in Gary McCoy's name." There was a pause. "Right. Do you want to transfer the funds to another account?" "To my personal account, now, and block all cards linked to his name." "Understood. Just to confirm, the additional holder will be notified of this change." "Perfect." I said this with the calm of someone who owes nothing else, and I hung up. I felt a lightness that I hadn't known for a long time. I didn't scream, I didn't face it, but I cut off the flow. And a man like Gary with no access to easy money. It's just a facade. I went back to my room. Melanie was still asleep, but her hand was warmer. I took the little wooden box I brought from Texas and placed it on the table next to the bed. It was for Emma, but I wanted her to see it. She wanted her to know that her mother's story didn't end there. "You'll still have a lot to tell your daughter, my girl," I said in a low voice, as if praying, and in that moment, something changed in me. I was no longer the father who waited for the storm to pass. I was the man who was going to protect what was left of his family, even if I had to descend into the rubble of lies to do so. And if you've been here listening to all this so far, stay with me, because the most difficult and most decisive moment in this history is yet to come, and when you arrive, you will understand why certain truths are only revealed in silence. Before leaving the hospital, I asked the nurse to let me know if Melanie woke up. He said he needed to solve something quickly. I took a taxi and went to the city registry office. It was early, but I couldn't waste time. I asked for copies of all the documents linked to the joint account I opened years ago. Liability statements, withdrawal authorization forms, vouchers. The attendant was surprised by my request. "Do you have a problem with the other holder?" I just looked at him. "Not yet, but there will be." I left there with a briefcase under my arm. Each leaf there was a piece of the puzzle. And the more I read, the more I understood that what Gary did was not impulsive. It was calculated, premeditated. He didn't disappear out of fear. He fled because he already knew that the time for the collection would come, and I was there to collect. I went back to the hospital, went up to the room and found Melanie awake, with her eyes lost in the ceiling. "Hi, my dad," she said in a weak voice. I sat next to her. "Did you sleep well?" She gave a half smile. "Enough to dream. I dreamed that Mom was here. She's somehow, and so did I, to hold you tight." She closed her eyes again, as if those words were a relief. I stayed there for a while in silence, just looking at her, thinking about what would come next. Because cutting off access to cash was just the first step. I had yet to see for myself what kind of life Gary had been leading, and who else was involved, and what I found when I followed his tracks. It was dirtier than I imagined. Are you ready to see how far he's been able to go? Because I found out. And this time, I kept everything. I was sitting in the same armchair back in the room when Melanie's cell phone suddenly vibrated. I took it by instinct, thinking it was a medical notification or something, but no, it was a video call. And the name on the screen, it was him, Gary. For a moment, my fingers stopped in midair, hesitantly. Then I answered. I didn't say anything. I just left the camera facing forward without showing my face. "Honey, honey," he began, already visibly altered. The sound of the music in the background was no longer there. His voice trembled. Did you do anything with the account? My card was declined in front of everyone. I'm here with the company's staff in the restaurant, and the waiter said that my payment was denied twice." The tone changed in seconds, from confusion to irritation. "Do you want to expose me, that's it? Want to embarrass me in front of my friends? Have you gone crazy?" I remained silent, and he didn't stop. "I'm going to get out of this, and when it comes out, I'm going to file for divorce. And I will take custody of the children. You can't afford it, Mel. You're sick. Go see. Don't even come back from this hospital." That there, it was the knife. The same one he stuck without hesitation, with that voice full of false concern. I stood up slowly, still holding the phone. Melanie was awake, her eyes wide, watching the scene in silence. I walked to the bedroom window, turned the camera around, and showed my face. "Gary!" He froze. The expression of arrogance withered at the same instant. "Did Donald? What are you doing with Mel's cell phone? Listen well to what I'm going to tell you. You just dug your own grave." And I hung up. The room fell silent. Melanie began to cry. But it was no longer that contained cry of pain, of despair. It was a different cry. Loose, as someone who finally understands that she is no longer alone. I walked up to her, held her hand. "He'll never touch you again, not even in children." She tried to say something but couldn't. He just squeezed my hand tightly. We stayed like this for a while. And at that moment, I understood that she needed it as much as I did. Because there are moments in life when everything we need, it is someone who finally says, "Enough." And you who are there listening to me, have you ever been through a moment like this, when someone hurt you so badly but you couldn't react? When it seemed that no one was going to defend you? If you've experienced this, comment below. I understand you. Because this pain, this feeling of abandonment, of powerlessness, many people carry in silence, and maybe now is the time to let go. Melanie calmed down little by little. I asked the nurse to bring a light tranquilizer. She fell asleep again. I went out into the hallway, closed the door carefully and took a deep breath. It was time to take the next step. Because Gary, he didn't know, but I was already 2 steps ahead. And the next truth I discovered, it would be the worst of all. She woke up with heavy eyes, as if coming back from a dark place. She was still holding hands with me, and when she opened her eyes and saw me there, sitting next to her, she let out a sigh that looked more like a muffled cry. "Father," the voice came out broken, but it was her. My girl, my little girl coming back. I moved a little closer, took off my glasses and looked straight into her eyes. He said nothing. I just waited. She turned her face to the side, stared at the wall for a few seconds, as if looking for courage inside a deep hole. And then he began to speak. "I tried, Dad. I swear by everything I've tried. After Jack was born, things have changed." He said that it was just tiredness, that the baby sucked the energy, that we needed time. And I believed it. I thought it was just a phase. She stopped, took a deep breath. But it wasn't a phase. He was the one who was changing. Or maybe he's always been like that, and it just took me a while to see it. That cut me off. She continued, her voice breaking. "He started to look at me like I was a burden, a weight. I woke up at dawn to breastfeed, and he slept as if he was single. I would stay up all night with Jack with a fever, and he would travel with his friends, saying he needed to relax." I closed my eyes for a moment. Her every word was like a hammer to the wall I'd been trying to hold up. She looked at me. "I didn't tell you before because I didn't want to worry you. You had already lost Mommy. I thought I could handle it, that if I smiled enough, he would see me again." He paused. Her face contracted in a deep cry, the first she let out entirely. And then came the diagnosis. The doctor talking about an advanced stage, and Gary, he just looked at me and said, "This is going to end our lives." "Our life, Dad." As if I had chosen this. I got even closer, shook her hand with all the care that fragility allowed. I couldn't speak. I just stayed there. The heart was all torn, because seeing a child suffer is a pain that has no remedy. She continued between sobs. "He started going out more, arriving late. He said that the air in the hospital was bad for him. Then he stopped coming for good. He said that I had to learn to get by. And I accepted. I thought it was fair, that he wasn't obliged to go through this." Her eyes went back to mine. But deep down, I just didn't want to admit that he was already gone, that I was living alone with 2 small children and a tumor in my body. I couldn't stand it. I put my hand to my face, tried to contain what came, but I couldn't. Cried. I cried silently, without noise, without despair, but I cried like an old man who failed to protect what he loves most. "You're not alone anymore, my daughter." That was all I could say, and that seemed to be what she needed to hear. She collapsed into my arms, weak but surrendered, as who can finally stop being strong. We stayed like that for a while, just the 2 of us, father and daughter. No judgment, no advice, only presence. And you know, sometimes that's what we need. Someone who stays, someone who holds his hand and says, even without words, "I'm here." Because the world can fall, but if someone stays, we get up. I know there are a lot of people on the other side listening to this and thinking about someone who also shut up too much, cancelled himself too much so as not to worry anyone. If you know this pain, that of hiding your own pain to protect others, write here in the comments, I know what it's like. Because this story, deep down, belongs to many people, and it deserves to be heard. She calmed down until the crying turned to silence. A different silence now, not abandonment, but of relief, of those who know they don't need to pretend anymore. I adjusted her pillow, pulled the blanket, held her hand again. You're going to get out of it, I said. And when you get out, you'll look back and see that you were stronger than all of them combined. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and fell asleep. And there, seeing her sleep with a lighter face, more at peace, I felt inside me that something was turning. There was still a difficult road ahead, but now she no longer walked alone. And me, I had already started to rebuild the land, because what I found out after that day set fire to all that was left of hope in Gary. Want to know what it was? So get ready, because the next visit I made, he went straight to the neighbor's house, and what she told me, it was the final blow. That morning I woke up before sunrise, not for insomnia, but for purpose. I had slept little, my body tired and my soul in tatters, but inside me there was one thing that wouldn't let me stop, a feeling that only those who are real fathers understand. I needed to act, not for revenge, but for justice, by Melanie, for the children, and perhaps even by myself. I had a quick coffee at the hotel next to the hospital, the same one I hurriedly arranged when I decided to stay close to my daughter. I went up to the room and took out of my backpack the papers, the notes, the prints that I had been collecting since the first day, the notebook where I recorded the times, the names of the places, the values. I spent an hour looking at each expense in the reserve account, the same account that one day I created so carefully, thinking about the family's emergencies. And what I found there, it was a parade of selfishness. Dinners in Beverly Hills, boat rental in Marina del Rey, shopping at expensive stores on Rodeo Drive. Hotel stays that charge more per night than I spent in an entire month in Austin. Everything coming out of that fund that I saved penny by penny, with the sweat of a lifetime. I called Mike, my old friend and lawyer. We have worked together at the construction company for years. He was always firm, discreet, the type who solves without spreading. I explained the situation. Everything, no flourish. Terminally ill, joint account, unauthorized spending. Gary absent. His answer was direct. Document everything, every penny, and send it to me in chronological order. I knew what that meant. So did he. Justice was going to begin, but not with fanfare, with method. And that's what I did. I went down to the hotel reception, asked for access to the computer and the printer. I organized the statements, the screenshots of social networks, the bank messages, the digital receipts. Everything numbered, dated, with place and value. I made a folder like in the old days of the project, when I prepared reports to present to the council. But this time, what I was going to present was much more serious. The dishonesty of a man who was supposed to protect his wife and children. And while I was printing all that material, I found myself thinking, how many other parents out there have gone through this? How many good people are deceived by smart people who know how to smile while stealing? If this piece of my life can become a mirror or a hug for someone, will it help me to carry it forward? Like and subscribe here to the channel. It makes more difference than you think, because there are many good people who need to hear that they are not alone. And I'm here opening my chest so that this story is not in vain. With the briefcase in hand, I went straight to the Los Angeles police station, LAPD there on Wilcox Ave. I was attended by a young, polite officer. I introduced myself, handed over the documents, and explained what had happened. He called an investigator. I waited a few minutes. The investigator read everything calmly. He did not interrupt. He only shook his head from time to time. When he finished, he looked me in the eye and said, "You have enough material to open a bulletin for embezzlement and possibly fraud. Let's register it now." I signed the BO, left a copy of the folder with them, and left there with my heart beating firmer. That wasn't going to bring my daughter back to health, nor would she erase what she suffered. But it was the first brick in the reconstruction of our dignity. I didn't want to see Gary arrested. That wasn't the point. What I wanted was that he knew that it did not go unnoticed, that someone saw, that someone had the courage to act. I returned to the hospital with a less heavy soul. I entered the room slowly. Melanie was sleeping. The children were still at the neighbor's house. I sat in the armchair and looked at her for a while. "Justice has already begun, my daughter," I whispered, "and it will arrive in the right way, without shouting, no rush, but accurate." That same day, I received a message from Mike. "We have already filed a lawsuit. He will be notified soon." And when that notification arrived, well, Gary would finally understand that what he called freedom, cleverness, came with high interest rates. But before that, I still had one last visit to make, because there was a person that he knew more than he showed, and what she told me opened a wound that I didn't even know existed. Want to know who it was? So stay with me, because the next face that appeared in that story, it was one I would never have imagined. 2 days after the complaint at the police station, I sat down with Mike on a video conference. He was in Austin, as always in a crooked tie and a serious expression. An old friend who had already gotten me out of a lot of labor trouble at the construction company, but the subject was different. It was personal. "Donald," he began, "I've reviewed everything. That account was in his name, and Gary was only authorized. The use of the funds technically was not a marital crime. It was appropriation of resources from a third party, and this gives us the basis for a civil and even criminal lawsuit." I nodded, silent. He continued, "We are going to file an emergency measure to freeze his assets. If he still has any personal assets, let's lock him in before he's gone." That was it. Every step was meticulous, calculated, and it wasn't revenge, it was justice. I wanted to make sure that if my daughter survived, she didn't have to carry the financial weight of abandonment as well. And if he didn't survive, so that her children would at least have the right not to depend on a father like that. I printed the papers at the hotel, took them to the hospital. Melanie was already more lucid that day. She was weak, but with brighter eyes. I explained everything slowly, point by point. I showed the documents. She read it silently. When he reached the end, his hands began to tremble. "I thought he was my partner, Dad." Her voice cracked. "I thought that he was going to be with me, even if everything went wrong." I didn't know what to answer. I just put my hand on hers. "You don't need to find it anymore, my daughter. Now you know who you can count on." She signed the papers with tears in her eyes. Each signature was a cut, but also a step towards freedom. Mike filed a lawsuit in Los Angeles court urgently. A judge granted the partial freezing of assets, alleging emotional and financial abandonment of a person in serious clinical condition. The hospital cooperated without difficulty. The report was signed by 2 doctors and a psychologist. They described Melanie's condition in detail. Stage 4, intensive follow-up, impossibility of taking care of the children alone, absence of the spouse in the medical record. All documented, all true. From there, we filed another request, emergency custody of the children in the name of the maternal grandmother, who was already deceased, and by extension, the grandfather. I presented proof of income, housing, reference letters from the school in Austin where the grandchildren could be enrolled, and the father's absence history in recent months. Every line written there was like a mirror of what Gary tried to hide, and I was willing to show everything. During this process, I sat once again next to Melanie while she slept. I watched her eyes closed, her breathing slowly, her fine hair falling through the pillow. The truth is that no matter how strong we try to be, Seeing a child in this state breaks anyone inside. But there, in that hospital, I also understood something. The love that silences. It is love that protects the most. Because I might not have answers for everything, but I was there, and sometimes presence is worth more than any explanation. If you've come this far, listening to this story, know what? The most memorable moment is yet to come. Because everything I've done so far, it was still just the base. What would come next? It was the most accurate blow, and it was given with silence. Because when the judge first hit the gavel, it wasn't in a court. It was inside my chest. But there was still a piece missing from this puzzle, and I went after her. A woman, one who lived across the street, and when she opened the door, I understood that Gary never played alone. I was sitting there in the hotel room, surrounded by papers, statements, hospital documents, and lawyers' opinions, when I snapped. Something told me that there was still more behind it all. It was like when I was working in engineering, and I felt like a calculation wouldn't add up, even after reviewing it 1,000 times. The number was right on paper, but deep down, the structure was wrong. It chased me until I found what was out of place. And that's when I remembered what Melanie had said, weeks before the diagnosis, in a quick phone call we had. Gary lives with his cell phone in his hand, laughing at messages. But when I get close, he turns the screen. At the time, it went unnoticed. But now, with everything I discovered, this phrase gained another weight. I went back to the hospital the next day and asked, quite rightly, if I could take a look at the cloud files she used. She didn't quite understand, but she gave me the password. There's nothing there, Dad, only work stuff. I forced a smile. Trust me, it's just in case. When I got back to the hotel that afternoon, I sat down with her laptop and started digging through her emails. In the beginning, it was just spreadsheets, company projects, meetings, but in the middle of a folder of drafts, I found an unsent email, dated more than a year prior to diagnosis. It was addressed to Gary himself. The first sentence paralyzed me. I saw the messages with Jessica. I know you slept at her house after that conference in San Diego. I stayed there, looking at the screen, stationary, with trembling fingers on the keyboard. I opened the folder of old messages, synced to the drive, and there they were, email exchanges between him and a certain Jessica M. The messages ranged from disguised indirects to open statements, photos, travel promises, some of them with dates that matched the days when Gary said he was working on company stuff. That made me see clearly that he had already left long before the disease. Only his body still lived there. But the heart, the head, they had been elsewhere for a long time. I printed everything. I organized it in a separate folder. I went back to the hospital. I waited for the right moment, when Melanie was awake and with less tired eyes. I sat on the edge of the bed, took a deep breath. There's one thing you need to know, and I'm not going to lie. It's going to hurt. She looked at me, and he just nodded, as if he no longer has the strength for surprises. I showed the emails, the dates. I told him what I found, with all the delicacy I could muster. She read everything. He didn't cry, he didn't scream. He just closed his eyes and stayed like that for a while. So I wasn't going crazy, she said, almost in a whisper. I felt, but he always made it seem like it was in my head. I shook her hand tenderly. You've never been crazy. I was just surrounded by lies. She let out a long sigh, as if exhaling a weight of months. Thank you, Dad, for showing me. I saw in her eyes a bitter relief, of those that do not cure, but at least clarify. And in the midst of that silence that came later, I kept thinking about how some truths arrive late, but still liberate. It's curious how certain memories have this power. They come back, even when we've done everything to forget, and sometimes they are the missing key. Tell me something. Have you ever been through this? Have you ever had a memory, a detail that seemed small, but suddenly made everything fall into place? If you've experienced something like this, comment here. I felt it. Because sometimes sharing the memory helps to carry less weight. With that evidence, Mike filed the petition for divorce, on the legal basis not only of abandonment, but also of adultery. The judge received the evidence, attached it to the case, and initiated the procedure of preventive freezing of the assets on behalf of Melanie. Gary was running out of room to run. Every door he knocked on, now it had a lock. But the question that began to hammer inside me was another. And the boys, where were they really? The neighbor said they were with her, but something didn't add up. I hadn't seen their faces, I hadn't heard a little voice or a toy lying around. And deep down, I felt it. Something there was wrong. And what I discovered after that door, it took me off the ground. Do you dare to know? Because the truth, there are times when it burns more than lies. By the end of that afternoon, the hallway on the 7th floor of Cedars-Sinai was quieter than usual. I had just left Melanie's room after helping her drink some juice on the rocks. She was nauseous, her mouth dry from the treatment, but she still insisted on thanking me for every sip, as if I was doing more than just being a parent. I walked to the coffee machine, but I didn't even put the glass under the spout. I saw when he came in. With sunglasses, a dress shirt ironed with great zeal, and that half-rehearsed walk, as if preparing in the mirror. He was the type of man who never knew what a hospital was, but always knew how to pose to look present. Gary. He walked slowly, looking around as if waiting for an audience. When he saw me, he stopped. He took off his glasses slowly. He stared at me. I stood there, like a rock. "Donald," he said, his voice low, almost theatrical. I need to see Melanie." I took a step forward. "She doesn't want to see you." He smiled as if he didn't understand. "Seriously, I need to get in. I messed up, I know, but I didn't know how to deal with all that." "No," I replied firmly. "What you didn't know was to stay. The difference is big." He tried to pass me, but I opened my arms, blocking the passage with my body. "If you want to talk, talk now. Here." I discreetly took the cell phone from my pocket and started recording. He saw it. I knew what that meant. Still, he began to speak. At first, as he always did, and posing. "Look, I never had a family reference, you know. When she got sick, I panicked. I didn't know how to act. It was a lot of pressure. I just listened to him, like someone listening to a client trying to justify a rigged budget." He continued, "I made a mistake, I know, but we can solve this as adults. Like family." That word fell like a stone. Family. The same word he ignored when he spent the emergency fund on parties and dinners, when he left 2 small children sleeping with the neighbor, when he disappeared for weeks while his wife languished alone in a bed. "Family?" I repeated. "You were on a yacht, champagne in your hand, while she was taking morphine to get to sleep. What part of this is familiar to you?" He did not answer. He just lowered his head. His shoulders slumped. The pose fell apart. The good guy's makeup began to melt. We were silent for a few seconds. He tried another card. "And the boys? You can't decide everything like that. I'm still their father." I took a deep breath. I approached slowly. They don't need an absent father. They need someone present. And now, for the first time, they have that. The truth is, I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab that man by the collar and show one by one the papers he had signed without reading, the statements of the accounts he drained, the messages he exchanged with his lover while my daughter cried in the next room. But I didn't, because I understood that the most powerful is not the one who shouts. It is the one who remains silent while the other collapses under his own weight. He even tried to justify himself, mumbling something about second chances, about having time to fix it. I didn't answer. I just turned off the recording, put my cell phone back in my pocket and said, "You're going to hear from justice now. I have already done my part, and well, you've done it too." I turned my back and went back to the room. Melanie slept, her face lighter. I looked at her and thought about how many times that man promised eternal love and didn't even fulfill the basics. And there, in the silence of that night, I realized that sometimes justice does not need judges nor a gavel. Sometimes it comes in the form of a father who simply, it does not shut up. But there was still a part of the story that I didn't know. A part that involved the boys, yes, but also something even deeper, something that would come from the mouth of one of them. And when he spoke, even what I thought was right changed. Would you have the courage to listen to what a child revealed without even knowing the weight of what he said? Because that's it, that everything turned upside down. The next morning, the Los Angeles sky was covered in a fine fog, as if the city had also woken up tired after so many days of accumulated pain. I left the hotel early, with the brown leather briefcase under my arm. I walked with steady steps to the side parking lot of the hospital, where I knew Gary had a habit of leaving the car. He was not in the room, not even in the hallway, but I was sure it would appear, and it appeared. 10 minutes later, I saw that black car parking in the usual spot. He came down with his shirt rumpled and his hair disheveled, the haggard air of someone who finally understood that he had lost control. When he saw me, he stopped. He said nothing. He just stared at me. I walked towards him and bluntly held out the briefcase. "Here are the documents." He hesitated. "What documents?" "Divorce, misappropriation, restraining order, everything signed, all official." His face lost the little color it still had. He picked up the briefcase with trembling hands. He began to flip through the papers, his eyes running fast along the lines. This cannot be definitive. We can talk. I can fix it. I raised my hand. "You will no longer have access to it, nor to money, nor to the children." He looked at me as if I had taken the ground out from under his feet. "Donald, I made a mistake, but you can't do that. They are my children too." "Then why did you leave them with a neighbor for days while you were traveling by boat?" He did not answer. His silence said more than any excuse. In my pocket, I received confirmation by message. The hospital had just officially revoked his registration as Melanie's companion. From that moment on, Gary could not even enter the floor of the oncology ward without express authorization. He was out of her life, out of the lives of children, out of the comfortable lie he built for years. I went back inside the hospital, leaving him there standing with his folder open, facing his own mistakes printed on letterhead. I went up to floor 7, took a deep breath, and entered the room. Melanie was awake, her eyes tired but attentive. I sat next to the bed. He received the papers. She didn't say anything. He only looked at the window for a moment. Then, in a low voice, he asked, "Did he say anything?" "He tried, but now he talks to himself." She took a deep breath. I knew that, even with everything, part of it still hurt inside, because love doesn't disappear along with heartache. Sometimes it goes out slowly, like a candle that still burns, even without heat. Later, the lawyer called me. The judge accepted the request for urgency. The provisional custody of the children was with me, for now, until Melanie's health allows her to return. The boys would be taken from the neighbor's house, who, as we later discovered, was more of a friend of Gary than of the family. Another knot unraveling, another silent relief. That same night, while changing Melanie's pillow and adjusting the blanket over her feet, the nurse came in with an envelope in hand. "It's just here. It was delivered by a motorcycle courier. They said it was personal." Melanie opened slowly. It was a letter. He recognized the lyrics right away. It's his. She read it by herself. In silence, the words ran through his eyes like arrows trying to pierce a skin that no longer bled. Finished. He folded the paper, and without hesitation, he tore it into small pieces, letting them fall on his lap like confetti of a love that was never true. "Now I see," she said, in a tone that mixed pain and relief. At that moment, I realized the break was not only with him, it was with the entire past, with the cycle of fear, dependence, and silence. Melanie had finally cut the thread that held her together, and now she was free. But fate still had one last test in store, because the disease silent and treacherous, would not recede so easily, and what would come in the following hours, no one could predict, not even me. The fall of certain men does not begin with a bang. It begins with a silence. That kind of silence that walks in through the front door and sits next to you without asking permission. It was like that with Gary. The day after the delivery of the documents, he disappeared. He did not return to the hospital. He didn't care. He did not send a message. But the world, this one does not forgive when the mask falls. The first signs started on the cell phone. The lawyer showed me. Cards declined in sequence, fuel, market, restaurant, one by one, blocked. The reserve account that he used so much as if it were an extension of his own ego. Now it was empty, and the bank already knew. The judicial notification of misappropriation had already been filed. The justice had a name, date, and CPF, and it was on its way. On the same day, the consulting company where he worked published a discreet note, employee away indefinitely. They discovered that he used company hours to take care of personal matters, that he falsified reports, and, well, the yacht story fell like a bomb inside. That post he made, with the bottle of champagne in his hand and the caption, "Well-deserved rest," was his own shovel. I'm not one to mess with social media, but my eldest grandson, from another marriage, helped me create an anonymous profile. And it was from there that we released the Instagram screenshots. No hatred, no scandal, just the unvarnished truth. While she was in the ICU, he was here. The caption said little, but the images said it all. The internet did the rest. In the comments you could read, "Scoundrel, coward. How does someone do that?" Friends began to disappear from his profile like dry leaves in the wind. The list of followers melted. His reputation, the one he wore as armor, turned to dust. I tried not to get too involved with that part, but I confess, there was something restorative about watching the world react, as if at last someone had said, "Enough." And if you're still here with me listening to all this, I ask you one thing from the heart. There are things that we live and keep, but maybe by telling, we help another heart to breathe. Like this video and sign up. And let's make this story reach those who need it. Sometimes a stranger's word is what saves someone's day, but what struck me the most in this process was a small detail. Small indeed, an automated email. Gary tried to rent a new apartment in Burbank, one of those modern buildings with a gym and balcony. But the credit system denied it, twice. He had no steady income, he had no active account, and now he didn't even have a guarantor. He called his parents, who lived in Nevada. He asked for help. The answer came cold. "She didn't deserve this. Don't look for us." It was the first time I heard Gary scream, but not live. The audio came from the lawyer's mailbox. He was desperate, trying to understand what he had done. He would say things like, "I just wanted some peace. Why are they destroying me like this?" And there I understood. He had not yet understood the difference between peace and escape. At the hospital, things calmed down. Melanie slept better. The nurses said that she reacted more to the medications. We knew that cancer was treacherous, that it could come back at any time, but there were days of respite. Small moments, like seeing her laughing softly at an old video of her children, that seemed like miracles. And it was on one of those days that she turned to me and said, "Dad, do you believe he's going to try anything yet?" I answered sincerely, "I believe, because men like that don't accept losing. But this time, he's going to knock on the wrong door." And that's exactly what happened, because Gary, he did not accept the end. And that week, he prepared one last blow, something he believed to be brilliant. But that only served to show, once and for all, the kind of man he really was. And what he tried, it almost made me lose control, almost, because I still had a letter saved. And when I played, he understood that you don't play with a daughter's heart, much less with that of a father. Want to know what it was? Brace your breast. Because to this day, when I remember, a bitter taste still rises in my mouth. Life has a curious way of going on, even when everything seems stagnant. That's what I felt in the weeks that followed. Gradually, like a window that opens slowly, Melanie began to react. His face was still pale, his hair fell in thin strands on the pillow, but the eyes sparkled again. A shy glow, it's true, but it was light. And after so long walking in the dark, any light feels like sunshine. The doctors commented that she had been responding better to the new protocol. The body began to defend itself, albeit with difficulty. And more than the body, I felt that it was her spirit that was rising. It was the head nurse's idea to call the hospital's social worker, a young, calm-spoken girl named Serena. She sat with Melanie for a few days, listened more than she spoke, and then suggested therapy sessions right there in the hospital. I thought my daughter was going to refuse. He was always resistant to opening up, especially with strangers. But no, she said yes. I said yes with my eyes downcast, but with a firmness that made me believe. The first conversation was difficult. I waited outside, pacing back and forth like an old dog looking for a place to lie. When the therapist came out, she came up to me and said, "Today," she cried. But it wasn't pain. It was a relief. The next day, Melanie asked me for something I'd waited a long time to hear. "Dad, can the children come and see me?" My chest almost burst with joy. I spoke with the lawyer, with the psychologist, with the hospital. I organized everything carefully. I didn't want it to be a shock, neither for her nor for the little ones. But it was so much lighter than I imagined. Emma came in with a drawing in her hands. She had made her mother lying on a bed of flowers with a crown on her head. Jack came with his cell phone in his hand, showing a video of him scoring a goal in training. Melanie cried, but it was not sadness. It was emotion. It was nostalgia unraveling. They hugged for long minutes. I stood there at the door, not wanting to interrupt, just watching that family that, despite everything, was still standing. That day, returning to the small Airbnb I rented near the hospital, Jack asked me if I knew how to cook. Laugh. He said he was no chef, but that he made a decent chicken rice. We ended up sitting at the cramped kitchen table, eating in silence and laughing at the funny faces of the under-seasoned chicken. It was a simple night, but loaded with something that I didn't even know how to describe anymore. Peace, perhaps, or cure. And it was there in that small kitchen, seeing the two laughing, that I thought, we lose so much trying to keep what is already over. That's what Melanie did for years. He tried to maintain an already failed marriage. He tried to sustain an image that hurt more than it protected, and it took almost losing everything for her to finally break free. And if you've been here with me so far, listening to this story, I tell you, the strongest moment is yet to come. Because the climax is not always the scandal. Sometimes it's the silence after the pain, and this silence, I was still going to say a lot. In the days that followed, the routine took on a new form. I took the children to school in the morning, went to the market, then went to the hospital. Emma brought new drawings. Jack made a point of updating me on what the coach said. Melanie asked for help with crossword puzzles and said that for the first time, she was able to sleep more than 3 hours without waking up in fright. The house was never rebuilt, but the home, this one was beginning to be born again, brick by brick, gesture by gesture. But like every story that is written with soul, ours still had a curve ahead. A revelation that didn't come from me, nor from Gary, but from a place where no one expected it. And what was said in that room that morning was the kind of thing that we don't forget even if you live another 100 years. Because it is true that only children have the courage to speak. And everything changed. 2 months after that reunion full of cracks and revelations, there we were, sitting side by side in the Los Angeles family courthouse. Me in a light blue shirt, as my wife liked, and Melanie in a flowered scarf on her head, a serene but firm expression. The disease still lived in her body, it's true, but there, in that room, It was courage that commanded. The lawyer was prepared with a robust folder of evidence, bank statements, photos of the yacht, screenshots of social networks, and the audios of the conversation recorded in the hospital corridor. Everything was organized to the millimeter, like a well-done project, and this time I was the engineer behind the structure. Gary walked in with the same expensive blazer as always, but something about it seemed smaller. Less in the eyes, less in posture, less even in pride. He sat across the room with his new lawyer, his third in a few weeks. When the judge arrived, the hearing began bluntly. Gary tried the theater. He said he was under emotional stress, that he didn't know how to deal with Melanie's diagnosis, that it's not easy to see someone you love get sick like that. But it only took 20 minutes of evidence for the tone of the room to change completely. The judge, a grey-haired man with a firm voice and a watchful eye, looked at him and said, "Mr. Peterson, emotional stress does not justify abandonment, much less luxury in the middle of a family crisis." And then one of the most memorable phrases of my life was said right there in front of everyone. "Whoever abandons at the worst moment does not deserve to be at the best." At that moment, I looked sideways and saw Melanie close her eyes. It was not despair nor relief. It was closure. That pause that the heart makes when it understands that the cycle is over. The judge decreed the divorce with guilt, granted monthly alimony to the two children, removed shared custody, and guaranteed full rights to Melanie. The initial supervision of the children would be with me until she recovered. The restraining order was also maintained indefinitely. Gary tried to protest. His lawyer asked for a review. The judge just raised his hand and said, "It's decided." Outside, the morning was clear and windless, a rare thing that month. When we descended the steps of the court, the nanny was waiting for us with the children on a bench near the garden. Emma ran first, then Jack with his sneakers untied and his jacket crooked. Melanie stooped down with difficulty but opened her arms anyway. They threw themselves on it with the strength of someone who wants to glue back what was broken. I stood a few steps behind, watching that scene as if it were one of those old family portraits that we keep in the living room. And that's when she looked at me, with her children in her arms, and whispered, "It's over." I just smiled and replied, "Now it begins." Because that moment was not about judicial victory, it was about emotional justice. And emotional justice, my friend, it is not written on letterhead. It is written in the eyes of the daughter who trusts again, in the silence of the grandson sleeping peacefully, in the hug that no longer needs to apologize. But like everything in life, even after justice, comes what no one expects. And that afternoon, when we returned home, something was waiting for me at the door of the Airbnb. Something I hadn't planned. Something that made me understand that certain wounds, they still had one last stitch to be sewn up. Want to know what it was? Get ready, because even I had to sit down to absorb it. Returning to Texas was like taking a deep breath after a long dive. The road felt different, as if every mile between Los Angeles and my old city had been redrawn with the marks of what we had experienced. It was autumn when we arrived, and the breeze had that smell of dry leaves, of time past, of a clean memory. Melanie was in the back seat, her head leaning against the window, her eyes closed. Emma slept on her lap. Jack listened to music with headphones and his feet dirty with dirt from the park where we stopped on the way. I drove slowly, no rush, as if I knew that destiny was not just a place. It was the return inside us. The house, despite the weather, was the same way. The balcony with the worn paint, the creaking gate, the wooden floor that crackles on the second step of the stairs. But there was something new there. A peace. A lightness. Maybe it was the absence of the pain we carried for so long. Maybe it was just the fact that everyone was together again. Melanie wanted to cook on the first Sunday. She made her mother's recipe, roast chicken with lemon and rosemary. The smell filled the house like in the old days. I sat in the chair at the end of the table and just watched. The children ran in the yard, barefoot, laughing loudly. She stirred the pots, humming down a song that Martha liked. Life, even after the chaos, finds a way to start over. On the porch, Martha's old swing was still there, but now restored. I sanded the seat, put new varnish on the chains. I did that on any given afternoon without anyone asking. It was my way of saying that she is still with us. Sometimes, in the late afternoon, I sit there alone with a coffee in my hand and the noise of the grandchildren in the background. The wind sways slowly, and I almost hear her voice saying, "Family is the one who doesn't leave your side in the darkest hour." That phrase stuck with me, not because it is beautiful, but because it is true. And in that hospital, in that courtroom, in that cramped kitchen, that's what I saw. My family, the one that remained, the one who fought, the one that was reborn. Today, looking back, I understand that we didn't lose everything. We only lost what was never real. Oh, Gary. He was an illusion that my daughter fed out of fear, tiredness, loneliness. But when the truth came, she chose to come out of the dark, and I was there, not to save her, but to remember who she was before the pain. Because sometimes all a parent needs to do is this: be. No fuss, no charge, only presence. The justice we seek was not done with scandal. It was done with patience, with proofs, with silence, and respect. This one returned to the table of our house. It came back to my grandchildren's eyes. He returned to my daughter's embrace. The pain still exists. Of course there is. It would be a lie to say that everything has passed. But she is no longer in charge. It no longer dictates the rules. Today, it is just a memory that teaches me, a reminder that life is fragile, yes, but it is also strong. That loss hurts, but presence heals. And that love, this quiet, firm love, which does not need to prove itself, remains. It remains in the small gestures, in the ordinary days, in the mornings when Emma calls me to see a drawing and Jack asks me for help with my homework. It remains every time Melanie sits with me on the porch and silently holds my hand. But even with everything in peace, there was still one last loose thread. A forgotten letter. An answer I didn't know if I deserved. And it was because of her that one afternoon I decided to return alone to that hospital. Not to see my daughter nor to face anyone, but to look for something I left behind, something that could perhaps end this story once and for all. And that's when everything changed, because what awaited me in that room, it was not what I imagined. Today, when I look out from the balcony and see Emma and Jack running across the lawn barefoot and their faces stained with ice cream, I feel something I haven't felt in a long time: lightness. Melanie, my daughter, is in remission. There are good days, there are difficult days, but she is alive and whole. She works from home with her graphic design projects, even redecorated her mother's sewing room to become a studio with the smell of lavender. Life has not gone back to the way it was, no. She reinvented herself, in silence, without fuss, like everything worthwhile. The other day, at a simple Tuesday dinner, Emma suddenly put down her fork and asked me, "Grandpa, how did you save Mommy?" I swallowed slowly, looked her in the eye, and only replied, "I was only around when she decided to save herself." And I think that's right. Sometimes our role is not to save anyone. It is just to remain, to be a port, to be root. I was betrayed without anyone knowing. I was humiliated by a man I took in as a son. But I didn't scream. I didn't retaliate with hatred. I won in silence. And this, it was my justice, because in the end life teaches that what is false falls on its own, and what is true, even if bruised, blooms again. Time has a beautiful way of returning everything to its rightful place. And when we choose to act with dignity, it may take time, but the answer comes, not with applause, but with peace. And you know what? The greatest victory of my life was not justice in court. It was seeing my daughter smile again without fear. My grandchildren sleep peacefully, and my heart, old but firm, rests knowing that I fulfilled my role as a father. If you have followed me here, I really thank you. Opening my heart and telling this story was not easy. But if this piece of my life can become a mirror, or even a silent hug for those who are going through something similar, it was worth it. And if you felt that too, give me a like. It works as a hug for this channel, a sign that my voice has reached you. Sign up too, so you can come back for the next coffee with me, and tell me in the comments of which city you are watching me. I love to wonder where this story is going. And if you can, activate the bell, so you don't lose it when the coffee is ironed again. Don't go away yet. Listen to the next true story that will appear on the screen. Always remember, each wrinkle tells a story, and each story carries a strength. Watch the next video here on the channel with another incredible story.